Hey friends, I'm Maxwell Freud, a queer Minneapolis-based board game designer and the host of Hatch This Way, a limited audio series where I chat with other queer folks in the tabletop industry to learn all about who they are and how they contribute to the hobby by being their authentic selves. So today I am joined by Brenna Noonan. Brenna, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to get to know you because you do so much cool stuff. So first question, talk to me about how you identify. What are all the cool things that make up Brenna?
Yeah, so I'm cis. My pronouns are she, her, but I identify as queer and more specifically as pansexual. So I experience attraction to all genders.
Perfect. I have not talked to anyone with that identity yet. So
Oh,
I'm
awesome.
excited. We're going to get into it. For people listening who don't understand what that means specifically, or maybe they've heard similar terms, can you talk about how is that different from bi, or like what's the difference?
Yeah, it's often used interchangeably with bisexual, I feel like, and I'll sometimes use bi as a shorthand, or like in more vanilla company, like bi is like a more recognizable term than pan. So sometimes I'll default to that. So bisexual has kind of evolved to be a more inclusive term. So instead of, it's kind of original meaning as like attracted to either gender, which like isn't really keeping with like being super inclusive. And now people interpret it as meaning attraction to your own gender as well as other genders is where the binary comes in. I think it's a great term. Lots of people use it and are really happy with it. For me personally, I just felt like pan better captured how I feel, but yeah, I will still default to bi sometimes depending on the company.
And I've heard comparisons to, if you watch like Schitt's Creek, I think he would technically be pan because he talked about
Yeah.
how, he's in the wine store and he's like, I care less about the label and more about what's on the inside.
Yeah, he drinks
I
red wine and white wine and
Yeah.
rosé wine. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he doesn't really care about, what's on the outside. It's more of like just the person. I've also
Yeah.
I know people who are omni, which I think is like the flip side, where not as attracted to like people, but very much attracted to the different outsides, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. So that was like a term I was like, oh, that's also a
Oh,
thing.
that's interesting. I don't really know a lot about the Omni label, so I'll have to look into that.
So like for people listening who don't know, like bi erasure is very much a thing where a lot of gay people or lesbian people will like, we're not all perfect, go figure, where like a person who is pan or bi will say, oh, I'm attracted to men and women, or I'm attracted to all people really. And we say, well, are you really, or are you just experimenting, and are you actually just gay? That's like the
Or I think more commonly, are you just straight? Is usually
oh
the
yeah, are you just
yeah.
like testing the waters or
Right.
something?
Mm-hmm.
um what's your perspective or experience with that kind of?
Whew, yeah, that's a deep one. There's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I'm actually like in a long-term relationship. I'm partnered with a man, even though I love people of all genders. So yeah, I do get that a lot. Or people assume like since I'm like visibly in a relationship with a man that like I can't also be pan or bi or queer or whatever. I think it's probably disproportionately applied toward women. That idea is kind of my interpretation of it. I think there's a lot of like cultural messaging around like how women like experiment with queerness and stuff that I know I really internalized. So like a little bit of background on me. I think I like had a girlfriend like before I had a boyfriend, like if we're talking like a more serious relationship. But I had really internalized this messaging that like, oh, like all girls go through this phase where like, they have a lesbian phase and they like to experiment and stuff. So I was like literally like dating women and being like, this is such a quirky phase that I'm in. Like just really, like not grasping like my own queerness at the time. Yeah, so I do think it's really damaging. There are certain like privileges that also come with that. Like I know that there's a lot of discussions around like what is straight passing and that because I personally feel like I do have a privilege where like if I'm out in public with my husband, then we're probably less likely to be harassed or something because we're not as like visibly queer a couple. So I do think that's a thing, but I know that like straight passing can also be applied in a way that's like damaging and kind of like erases inherent queerness. So it's really complicated. I do think the makeup of my relationship affords me some privileges, but it does also come at the cost of like erasure, mostly from within the queer community, but also from the hetero community as well.
I don't know. Do you feel like it's getting better or worse just based on your experiences in life? Or do you feel like it's pretty consistent? I don't know.
That's a good question. I feel like some things are getting better. Like what I was talking about with like feeling this like societal messaging around like experimentation and how it's not like quote unquote like real queerness. I do think that's getting better, and people are now more likely to just say like, oh well, you're queer instead of just like, oh, this is a phase that you're in. In terms of like the perceptions from the queer community, though, I feel like that's probably the same. I haven't noticed a huge change there. I think that's been like pretty consistent in my experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, who of us can really say like who has enough perspective to really tell us the trajectory?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would like to think that as people become more comfortable with less gender binary being the norm, it's not gay and lesbian. We have a lot of other identities in the umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
I think it doesn't hurt us to embrace the straight passing people in our community. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no reason that we have to be like, no, you're not gay enough to come to our parade. Like, that makes no sense.
Yeah, and there's also kind of a layer of assumption also that like what might look like a straight passing relationship actually isn't. Like maybe
mm,
somebody's non-binary or something like that. So yeah, I think it does kind of lead to like knee-jerk reactions and assumptions that would be good to get past, and so we can like kind of get past like assuming somebody's gender, what their orientation is. Just assuming less, I think, is good.
yeah, it's been a weird thing too because I've been talking to, so like you and I are meeting for the first time, really,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been talking to friends and I've had conversations with them that have never really come up because we're just friends. I don't really, I don't know if it's a bad thing, but I enjoy their company just being with them. It's a kind of a rare opportunity just to sit down and talk about uh, like their unique. Like I have a bunch of polyamorous friends who I've never really sat down and just talked to them about how they navigated or what they experience or things but I enjoy hanging out with them when I hang out with them, and I don't it's not a thing I need to know,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, I think with some friends I have unpacked it quite a lot, and we talk a lot about like our queerness and how it manifests and how we identify and like what queerness means to us and how it affects our lives. I'd say that's like a fairly common topic amongst my queer friends, or at least it's probably come up with each of them. Not that it's like all we talk about, but I think it's probably come up at least once with each of my queer friends, just like, what does this mean to you? Because it's so different to everyone.
I should probably be better at that, honestly. I kind of just like, oh great,
But
you're,
no, I mean,
you're,
it's dependent on, you and your friend group and, all of that. Like there's no wrong or right way to navigate it.
yeah. I think for me, I'm just very comfortable where I'm at in the queer umbrella, and so if someone says they're queer, I'm like, great, like
Mm-hmm.
we're family now. Like I think that's pretty much all I think about. So this I've really enjoyed getting to talk to people and just have some conversations that I've maybe thought about asking, but it hasn't been important enough for me to be like, I guess I haven't thought like, I don't need to understand this for us to connect
Mm-hmm.
personally, but I do feel like it's helped me make some deeper connections with friends that I have been friends with for years.
Yeah, I'd say
So,
that's true. For me, it doesn't necessarily come from a place of needing to connect, but I think like other perspectives help me better unpack myself. I think so. It's interesting to talk to my friends, especially other queer women, and get their take on it. And sometimes like I align with it really strongly, and other times I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. So yeah, it's just kind of like an interesting thing that comes up sometimes.
If a non-queer person wanted to talk to you, what's the situation, or what would be the preferred way that you would want someone to approach it and not make it weird or uncomfortable or abrasive?
Well, so my response is purely just myself. I'm not like, straight people listening, maybe don't do this to everyone. I'm honestly like an open book, like about most things. Like people can ask me whatever, and I'm usually happy to talk about it. But that's just me. And like, you know, there's obviously like a lot more people that don't feel that way, or, you know, it might not be safe for them to talk about that. I obviously have like several layers of protection, given that I'm like a white cis woman. So like, if you suspect somebody might be trans, like do not ask them about it in like a public setting. Like don't out people. Obviously that is not okay. But if you're in like a friend situation and you want to ask your queer friend about it, then I think that's fine. It would be fine for me.
Do you think there has to be some kind of established personal connection to really be comfortable talking about that with someone? I mean, would you ever just approach a stranger, be like, oh, hey, tell me about this?
Well, I probably wouldn't like approach a stranger, period. Well, I'll give you an example. I went to like a new board game meetup a few weeks ago, and we went out for drinks afterwards. And it was, you know, I had met these people like once or twice before, so we're still not getting to know you stage, and it came up, and I was really happy to talk to them about it and tell them a little bit, you know, about me and my identity. I was perfectly comfortable with that. So, you know, approaching a stranger, I don't know, but you know, as part of a introductory getting to know you session, then sure, why not?
If you can recall, like, how does something like that come up naturally in a conversation?
I think we were talking about the Batman. And I was talking about loving Robert Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, tell me more.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, did they think you were joking? And you're like, no, I genuinely am attracted?
No, they didn't think I was joking.
So in that case, you kind of like dropped a clue or something.
Yeah.
They weren't like, Brenna, wow, you seem really queer. Can you talk to me about that?
I've gotten that from other queer people, which is fine.
Really?
Yeah. Which is great. I'm always happy to hear that I give off, you know, queer vibes, because I'm always scared of coming off as too like normie or vanilla or whatever. Yeah, so I'm okay kind of like dropping those things into conversation, just as like opening the door a little bit to, you know, talk about that. I think for me, it's fine.
So talk to me about what you do in the board game industry, because you do some really cool things. So tell me everything about it.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the co-founder of a development studio called Quillsilver Studio. So what we do is we provide a wide range of services to the tabletop game industry, everything from game design and development, graphic design, art direction, illustration, sculpting, 3D work, all the way up to like Kickstarter, marketing, retail release. We're basically like a one-stop shop for publishers who need some help getting their games made.
What are some of your favorite projects that you've worked on?
Man, there have been some really good ones. I've been really lucky. I mean, Everdell is probably like the biggest game that I've worked on. That's kind of the one everybody knows. Role Player Adventures is another one that I'm super proud of. That was like a really huge project. It's like a big narrative storytelling game. And then, you know, we have a few coming up that I think will be really exciting. But, you know, we're really lucky. Like, we can be fairly picky about the projects that we take on. So every project I do, I'm pretty excited about, because, you know, we have to have like a certain level of excitement among us just to get it to like the approval stage.
So you mentioned Everdell. So I'm not gonna, I've literally seen you talk about it, I think on Twitter. That kind of comes up as an example of, you know, a game where there is a built-in binary husband-wife dynamic and nothing else. Maybe just talk to me about your process in that. And I think, what have you seen after that release that has come to light? And
yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. yeah, I've talked about it a couple of times, like on Twitter, you mentioned, so I'm happy to. So for context, there's 2 cards in the game. There's the husband card and the wife card, and they can be paired together. And a couple trans people actually reached out to me very graciously, I might add, and just saying, they felt excluded by those 2 cards and how they functioned in the game. And I just felt terrible about that, because it's, a really like sweet kind of wholesome game that I really want people to have an amazing time playing and just like have fun and lose themselves in that world. So for people to feel excluded was like the last thing I ever wanted. And it did just open my eyes to the fact that, like, even though like I identify very strongly as queer and as like very visibly queer as well, meaning that it's, part of my like public facing persona, like it's in my Twitter bio, it says like, I'm pansexual. Despite, being fairly keyed into that, I still kind of had like blinders on in that moment, and I didn't catch that, that it, that's something that could be exclusionary to people. And I really regret that. At the same time, in my role in that project as a developer, it wasn't really, I did not have like final say on those things. So I'm not positive how much change I actually could have affected, but I do wish that I had noticed it before it had been pointed out to me. I would love it if the publisher would, officially update that. I think, have expressed that they don't have interest in doing that, which I think is unfortunate. But it's something that I would love to see.
Yeah. I mean, as a professional creative person as well, like I cannot tell you how hard it is to keep like a perspective on all the things that I miss in just my day-to-day job of you get trapped in these creative projects. It's tough. Like that's why it's important for me personally to have a ton of people looking at everything I do, because I know I'm going to misspell words for sure, that I just can't see it because I'm doing a million different things. Development, like game development, there's so much going on. And Everdell especially, you're like, how am I balancing all these unique characters and abilities? It's not like we're not trying, right?
Yeah, the other thing was there's like some personal history there as well, because like the designer James, those 2 cards were conceived as representing him and his wife. So because like I had that knowledge, I just wasn't really thinking about it in any other context other than the 2 of them and it being representative of them. But of course, when you publish a game, it goes out into the big wide world, and in Everdell's case, is in a lot of homes. And people don't have that context. Once it's out of your hands, you kind of lose your imprint on it. And yeah, so I just regret that I didn't have sort of a broader eye to that, to see how it could be interpreted like outside of like the personal context that we had.
Have you changed anything because of that experience, where during your development process, you're trying to, I don't know how you handle playtesting or market research of getting like more diverse eyeballs on projects before they officially hit the press? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was definitely eye-opening for me. I like to think that I've, since then, that was like one of the first games I worked on, actually. So I'd hope that since then I've gotten a little bit better about that. Also, the reality is, we're not ultimately the one publishing the game. So, we can make our suggestions and recommendations, but ultimately it'll be up to the publisher at the end of the day.
Yeah, I've talked to at least one other person who he's a community manager, and he's like, I can make suggestions, I can write emails, but at the end of the day, same exact thing. It comes down to, I have yet to talk to someone queer who is the publisher, who is having final say on those things. So yeah.
Although I will say, I mentioned earlier being picky about projects, that goes for our clients as well. So, at this point, we're kind of only picking publishers that would be amenable to that sort of feedback or are already doing it themselves. We probably wouldn't work with somebody that wasn't willing to implement that.
I guess going off that idea, what are you seeing in the industry, and when you're looking at potential clients or publishers to work with, what are you looking for, and what are you seeing trend wise in terms of inclusion or being open to that? How would you know if a publisher was making those efforts?
I think it's getting a lot better. I think like on the content side, it's getting better. Like what the public sees, I think it's always a little bit hard to actually gauge like how much is happening behind the scenes. Like I think representation is like super important, obviously, but I'm probably more concerned with you know, like actual like marginalized people getting paid to make games is like really what I'm about. So you know, people can kind of make like, you know, a game with queer characters in it, but I'm more concerned with like, okay, well, how many queer people were paid to work on the game? That's sort of my concern. I do think there's strides in that though. Like there was a big game on Kickstarter a few months ago. I think it was called Artisans of Splendent Veil. Yeah, which I believe was designed by a non-binary designer, and I think features exclusively like queer playable characters, which I think is really cool. It's awesome.
So, do you actively, when you're developing or art directing a game, do you actively look for marginalized people to work with and hire?
Yeah, we try to do as much as we can. I mean, we don't really work with all that many outside people because we do everything pretty much in-house just with us. And when I say us, my company is myself, my husband, and his brother. So like we're a family company. But yeah, when we do hire outside, I do try to you know, cast a wide net and make sure that we're using like diverse hiring practices. Definitely.
Talk to me about how you got involved in this hobby in the first place. What got you here?
I've had such a strange path. So I have a master's degree in classical music composition, which yeah, it's on my wall, which is nice, but I'm not really doing anything with it. So I was a classical musician for a pretty long time, and then putting myself through school, I started learning marketing myself because I was marketing myself and my music. Then I kind of graduated to doing that for companies. Like I started out doing that for music nonprofits. This was in the Bay Area. I worked for like a couple local nonprofits there. Then I got like my first kind of like big girl job at Stanford, working with their jazz festival there. And then from there, I actually started working in pro sports for the San Jose Sharks. If there's any hockey fans listening, doing like marketing and audience development for them. So it was a very strange path. And then I ended up, I'm from New England originally. I went out to the Bay Area for grad school and then stayed there and worked there for a couple of years. I ended up moving back to New England to be closer to my family. And I had always kind of had it in my mind that I wanted to break into the game industry. I had tried a couple times in the Bay Area unsuccessfully. I didn't like know anybody, so it's really hard to get into that way. But then when I moved back to New England, I found this, small board game publisher that needed marketing help. So that was kind of how I got in there.
So what were some of those games? Because you said you knew or had an inkling that you wanted to get into the board game industry. What planted that little seed of this might be something I want to do the rest of my life?
Well, I actually wanted to get into the video game industry.
You're the second person to say that.
And I don't mean to make it sound like the board game industry is like game industry light or anything like that. It's definitely not. But no, I wanted to break into the video game industry, but I was, I did play a lot of like tabletop RPGs. I was quite into that at the time. So there was like some crossover appeal with board gaming from that. And obviously I played like most of the gateway board games that everybody plays. But yeah, when I started working in the industry, it was a little bit of a crash course.
Interesting. So did you, because like I personally like grew up basically, I'm not an only child, but I'm by far the youngest by a large margin. So I kind of like entertained myself with board games growing up by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I made up rules. And then I had friends that I played board games with. I was terrible at them always and still am. That's consistent. I mean, did you have like friends in middle school, high school, or college that you were doing these tabletop games with and stuff?
Yeah. Like we'd play D&D together and things like that. And also, things like Catan, we would play, Pandemic, like all of those. And we'd have like family game nights and play cards and chess and things like that. So, I played a lot of games, but I definitely haven't really ventured into like the hobby side of board gaming.
Say, oh, like one of my first games that I played with my friends was Diplomacy, and I
Mhm.
somehow still love playing games. I was not good at Diplomacy, so maybe that's why I didn't care that much.
Nobody is. It's okay.
So, what are some of the games that you like to recommend people who are interested in getting into the hobby, or like, oh, I played a fun game, or looking for more games, or like they heard board games are fun and they're looking for what should I buy? What do I play?
I just played a game recently by Randy Flynn called Cascadia, which I absolutely loved. It is a beautiful tile laying game about the Pacific Northwest, and you're building, your habitat and filling it with different like woodland animals. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. It's one of those games that I think almost anybody could pick up and play in a few minutes. I just got to play that one like in the last month, so I'm pretty hot on that one right now. Like people, I don't really have like, okay, I do have one favorite game, which is Res Arcana, which I'm obsessed with. But but often like, my favorite games are like the games I've played most recently, because they're the ones like fresher in my mind, and I'm like more interested in unpacking them and everything. So I played Cascadia recently, so I'm still pretty hot on Cascadia, and yeah, I definitely recommend that one.
What are some of your favorite things you look for in a board game? So you're like, ooh, I know this board game is totally me. What's it going to look or feel like?
Aesthetics are very important to me. There's definitely a class of board gamer that says, I don't care what it looks like as long as it's a great game. God bless them. That is not me. Which I think is evident from looking at, the games that we work on at Quillsilver. We're very into like the aesthetics and the gameplay. They're not mutually exclusive, I promise. Yeah, so I definitely look for aesthetics, like how beautiful the game is, what the components are like the ergonomics of the game, the thematic integration, like what does it feel like I'm doing? I'm really into that. Yeah, probably those things. I tend to like, like narrative, like storytelling games. I like cooperative games. I like kind of puzzly solo games.
Very similar.
Yeah.
We basically have to play cooperative because my partner is super competitive. So if we play a competitive game and he loses, we're never going to play it again. Like I can just sell it because it's never going to hit the table again.
I'm like, I play cooperative games because I'm like anti-competitive. Like I'm not competitive enough to like succeed at competitive games.
Yeah, I never play to win. I just play to have a good time every time.
I do like play a lot of competitive games, obviously, but like I don't like super like take that heavy games, or like where you can just like totally demoralize an opponent. Like
I just play tested a game and I was having a great time, and then there was a take that card that set me back. I was like, at that point, I couldn't. It was done.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll sit here for the next hour and a half, 2 hours and lose. But this was fun up until this point, right. I guess. It was really weird. But yeah, I agree. I hate take that mechanics because unless it's like just to take that game, okay. But if you're playing a longer game, it should not be attacking each other, I don't think, directly.
Yeah. I mean, my big thing is like I don't care so much about win or lose, but like at the end of the game, I want to be able to like look at my play space and be like, okay, I accomplished something. So games that just like totally shut you out of like scoring or whatever, like really upset me. Or if they like, break your engine before like you can realize what you're working on, I find that very unsatisfying. Like one of the only times I've gotten like a little bit tilted was playing Arboretum, which is like like a tree planting game. But it's because in scoring, it's been a couple of years since I've played it, but I think it's like in scoring, like if your opponent scores a tree, then like you can't score it or something. And like, I think I was playing with my husband. I think the way he scored, it made my score like a 0 or something. And I was just like, screw this.
And I feel like there are a lot of games like that, and some people love them, that's fine. But if you listen, you can hear when someone realizes they can't win about halfway through or earlier or later in the game. It was just like a,
yeah,
just like look at their options.
As a developer, that's like such a terrible play experience. I feel like I always try to avoid that. Like, I think that like there should always, be some path to victory, like however distant it may seem to the player. You definitely don't want players sitting at the table just being like, okay, well, I'm out. Like, yeah, it's not what you want. Although I did play the Game of Thrones board game a couple weeks ago, which we played with 7 players. It took 6 hours. And I came in second on the third tiebreaker. So like me and another player tied, and he ended up being first. But on the third tiebreaker, I was second. So it was very close. And that one, like, I was playing as House Greyjoy, which I actually didn't know this beforehand, but apparently the strategy with Greyjoy is to be extremely aggro. And I started the game, and I was kind of looking at like where they're set up on the map and like the cards that I had in my hand. And I was like, I feel like I need to be aggro here in order to break out of this like island area. So like I came out swinging and was super aggro the whole game, and it ended up working really well. And it was very like outside of my comfort zone. It was kind of fun because it was like, oh, I never play like this. Like normally I would just kind of be off in my own area, like letting the other players fight. So it was kind of fun for a change to be like the instigator sort of.
No, Game of Thrones was it's a good twist on what I consider diplomacy. It's like a diplomacy reskin with like not as dirty, but still pretty dirty.
Well, that's one that you go into it like knowing it's going to be a brawl, like you're not going to have like a warm, cozy time playing it. So that's okay with me. I think like, games kind of make a promise to you, and like you want that promise to be fulfilled. So when a game presents itself as being very like cozy and nice, and then is actually very cutthroat, I find that kind of jarring. But Game of Thrones, you know what it is, you know what you're getting.
Absolutely. What's the phrase? In the Game of Thrones, either you win or you die.
Yeah. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Cool. So what are your final thoughts or hopes, or I don't know, what's your general sense of the industry? What are you excited for? I don't know, give me something to.
Yeah. Well, so like I was saying, my main thing is, I want more people to actually be able to make a living making board games, specifically marginalized people, because it is pretty dominated by, a certain demographic, let's say, the board gaming industry. So I'd love to see, more genders, more like orientations, more people of color, obviously, all of those things. And not just in, I want those people to actually be able to make a living and have a good life and earn a livelihood doing that. Unfortunately, the board game industry has some growing up to do. Like the wages are pretty depressed in our industry. Generally, I'd say they're probably like 30 to 40% like below the market rate. I think that really needs to change. It's a big enough industry that it can change. So that's just kind of what I try to push for. And, I try to practice what I preach in my company and pay people, a really good living wage.
I love all those things. I think that's great stuff. I'm super honored that you took the time to chat with me today. It was super lovely getting to know you.
Thank you. You too.
Not knowing you, I think I knew you like very peripherally on Twitter. So
No, this was awesome. I'm really looking forward to like listening to this whole series once it's done, because I'm sure I'll get to learn about some new awesome queer people.
Thank you so much for joining me, and have an amazing time. Hopefully you can play games together in person soon.
Definitely, hope so. Thank you so much.
All right, that's all I have for this episode. If you want to see some of the amazing work Brenna does, you can check out the website quillsilver.com. And as a disclaimer, I just want to remind everyone that we are just two queer folks. We do not speak for the entire LGBTQIA plus community, nor are we trying to. The best way to be an ally is to keep learning, listening. Remember that we're all just trying to figure it out together. That's all I have. If you're listening, know that you're loved and perfect just the way you are. Until next time.